The forest was on fire. The once peaceful woodland now roared with the destructive force of flames, casting an ominous orange glow across the horizon. As Captain Sarah Hudson and her team fought to contain the wildfire, the ground beneath their boots trembled from the intense heat radiating from the flames. It was almost as if nature itself was waging war. The air was thick with smoke, the trees crackling as they burned to the ground. Every breath Sarah took burned her lungs, but she couldn't afford to stop. There were lives at risk, lives that depended on them. The camera zooms in on Sarah's face, sweat dripping down her brow, eyes narrowed in concentration. Her team was already exhausted from hours of battling the flames, but there was no time to rest. And then, something in the distance caught her attention. A movement, slow, deliberate. A bear. Through the smoke, she could just make out the large silhouette of a brown bear emerging from the haze. Her heart skipped a beat, and she quickly scanned the surroundings. Behind the bear, two tiny bear cubs struggled to keep up, their fur covered in soot and singed in places. The mother bear was in trouble, and so were her cubs. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They were trapped. The fire had spread too quickly, and there was nowhere for the bears to run. The mother's gaze, filled with panic, locked onto Sarah's eyes. There was a deep, pleading trust in those eyes. Sarah knew what she had to do, but the reality of the situation was hitting hard. This was no longer just about saving lives. It was a race against time. "Captain, we need to move fast." John Sanders, one of the firefighters, shouted over the deafening sound of crackling trees and roaring flames. His voice trembled, not just from exhaustion, but from the fear of what might happen if they didn't act quickly. Sarah stood frozen for a moment, contemplating their options. The fire was closing in fast, the flames licking at the trees surrounding the bears. Should they risk their lives to save the bears or retreat to safety? Sarah's thoughts raced. If they stayed too long, they could all die here. But if they didn't act, the mother bear and her cubs wouldn't stand a chance. Her heart pounded in her chest. This is what we signed up for, Sarah thought to herself. She had to lead, even if it meant putting herself and her team in danger. The camera cuts to a close-up of Sarah's face. Her eyes reflect the weight of the decision. Her voice cracks slightly as she makes the call. "We're going in. Move out, now." She sets off toward the bear, her steps purposeful but cautious, every movement calculated. She couldn't afford to make a mistake. As Sarah and her team carefully advanced toward the mother bear, the flames crept closer. The smoke intensified, obscuring their view. The ground beneath their feet was hot, and the trees groaned as they began to collapse. Every step felt like it could be their last. Sarah's team worked in unison, but the challenges piled up. The fire was everywhere, and they were racing against it. The bears were almost within reach, but the heat was becoming unbearable. Sarah could feel the sweat soaking through her jacket, but she couldn't stop. They had to reach the cubs before the flames did. The stakes were never higher. Just as Sarah was about to reach the cubs, a gust of wind sent a wave of flames roaring toward them. The heat intensified, and the air became thick with smoke. The mother bear growled, low and rumbling, a clear warning. Sarah froze for a moment, unsure if the bear would attack, but then she heard something else, a soft whimper from one of the cubs. The tiny bear was struggling to stand, weak from the smoke and heat. Sarah's hands trembled as she moved closer to the cub. She couldn't waste time. Every second was precious. She scooped the cub into her arms, her heart racing as the fire surrounded them. The mother bear didn't move to attack. She simply watched, trusting Sarah to save her child. The camera shows Sarah looking back, her face filled with resolve, knowing this was the turning point. Either they saved these bears, or they wouldn't make it out alive. The fire surged, fed by the relentless winds, and the heat grew unbearable. Captain Sarah Hudson felt the sweat dripping down her face, her hands trembling as she clutched the tiny bear cub to her chest. The cub, weak from the smoke and heat, barely moved, its body limp. Her heart raced as she glanced over her shoulder. The mother bear was still watching, her eyes filled with an almost desperate trust. But there was no time to waste. The fire was spreading faster than they had anticipated. The crackling of flames surrounded them on every side, and the air seemed to pulse with heat. It felt as though the forest itself was closing in on them. Sarah looked to her team, their faces covered in ash, their eyes full of determination. But there was fear in their eyes too. They all knew that this was more than just a rescue mission. It was a race against time. One wrong move, and they'd all be caught in the inferno. The cubs were heavy in Sarah's arms, and each step she took felt like an eternity. Could they really make it out in time? The fire was closing in on them quickly, and the distance to the truck felt farther than ever. Sarah's legs burned with exhaustion, but her will was stronger. She refused to give up, not on the cubs, and certainly not on the mother bear, who had already shown so much trust in them. For a brief moment, Sarah looked back at the mother bear, who was now standing still, her body tense, watching as Sarah and the team struggled to carry the cubs. The bear was aware of every movement. It was as if she knew that the fate of her children rested entirely in the hands of these humans. She didn't move, her eyes locked onto Sarah's, silently urging her to keep going. But there were moments of doubt. The heat was suffocating, the ground beneath their feet was treacherous, and the air was thick with smoke. The fire roared louder with every passing second, and they were almost out of time. Could they make it out? Would they be able to save both cubs, and the mother as well? As they moved forward, Sarah's thoughts raced, and the guilt began to creep in. What if they didn't make it in time? Her pulse was erratic as her mind fought against the growing panic. But then she heard it, a soft rumble from the mother bear. The sound was not threatening. It was a gentle, almost pleading hum. Please, save my babies. Sarah could feel it in the air. Despite the overwhelming heat and the suffocating smoke, Sarah and her team pushed forward, driven by a shared sense of duty. The bear cubs needed them. They had no other choice but to keep moving, no matter the cost. Just as they reached the truck, a massive gust of wind blew a wave of flames toward them. A wall of fire exploded in front of them. The team shouted as they dove toward the safety of the truck, narrowly escaping the flames that threatened to swallow them whole. The fire was now only yards away, the heat so intense that it almost felt as if the air was on fire itself. The team jumped into action, and within seconds, the first cub was safely inside the truck, lying on a blanket, gasping for air. Sarah quickly turned to grab the second cub, but as she reached for it, the mother bear's eyes never left her. It was as if she was silently watching, holding her breath, trusting them to do what they had promised. Now, the second cub was in Sarah's arms, but the fire was closing in, and the team had no time to waste. The air was filled with smoke, making it hard to see. With every breath, Sarah could feel the weight of the decision on her shoulders. She couldn't stop now. She had made a promise. She would get these bears to safety. With the cubs safe in the truck, Sarah turned to look at the mother bear, who was still standing near the flames, unwilling to leave her cubs. The moment of truth had arrived. The team couldn't wait any longer. Sarah looked at the team and signaled for them to move back toward the wildlife center. It was their last chance. Would the mother bear follow? They couldn't risk leaving her behind. The fire was still raging, but Sarah felt a strange, overwhelming sense of responsibility. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't hesitate. The mother bear was following, slowly but surely, staying close, her eyes glued to Sarah as they led her away from the flames. It was an incredible moment of trust, a silent pact between two species, both fighting for survival. With the mother bear following them and the fire inching closer, Sarah's team pushed through the thick smoke, their faces strained with exhaustion. The wildlife center was just a few miles away, but in this chaos, those few miles felt like an eternity. The wind howled around them, whipping the smoke in all directions, making it difficult to see or breathe. The fire was right behind them, its roar now deafening, a constant reminder that they had to keep moving. Sarah looked down at the cubs in her arms, their little bodies still trembling but alive. She could feel their tiny hearts beating against her chest, and it gave her strength. The mother bear, surprisingly calm for such a fierce creature, continued to walk beside them, occasionally glancing up at Sarah with those intense, trusting eyes. Every step, every breath felt like a test. Would they make it in time? With the truck doors now shut tightly, Sarah and her team focused on guiding the mother bear toward safety. The wildlife center was the only place where the bears could be treated, and Sarah wasn't about to let anything stop them from getting there. She knew that every second counted. As they reached a narrow, wooded path leading toward the wildlife center, the flames erupted in a violent surge behind them. The fire had grown larger, the smoke now so thick that it seemed as though night had fallen. Sarah's heart raced as she looked back at the approaching inferno, her eyes wide with fear. She could hear the sound of trees snapping in the distance. Time was running out. They had to get to safety now. The mother bear stayed close to Sarah, her massive paws moving cautiously through the smoke-filled air. Sarah could feel the bear's trust in every step. It was as if the animal knew that Sarah and her team were the only hope for survival. Her heart swelled with emotion. The cubs had fought to stay alive, and now they were so close to safety. But just as Sarah and the team turned the corner, the flames closed in. A huge tree collapsed in front of them, blocking the path forward. The fire roared louder, as if to remind them that the wildfire was always just a step behind. The team froze for a moment, the situation now more perilous than ever. There was no way around this obstacle, and the fire was just yards away. Would they have to turn back and risk getting trapped by the flames? Without hesitation, Sarah made the call. "We move through the fire. Stay close, stay low," she ordered. The team, though exhausted, nodded in unison. Sarah knew that this was the only chance they had. The fire was closing in too fast. They couldn't wait for the flames to subside. The team was risking everything, their lives and the lives of the bears, to ensure they made it through this. Sarah, holding one cub tightly in her arms, crouched low to the ground, crawling forward through the thick smoke. The team followed closely, keeping their heads down and staying as low as possible to avoid the worst of the flames. The mother bear, despite the fire, followed obediently, her body low, her movements cautious, as if she trusted Sarah's lead. In a moment of pure luck and courage, Sarah and the team broke through the dense smoke and emerged into the safety of the wildlife center. The rangers immediately rushed to help, their eyes wide with shock at the sight of the bear cubs and the mother bear, but they didn't hesitate. The team quickly carried the cubs to the safety of the medical tents, where veterinary staff immediately began to treat them for smoke inhalation and burns. Sarah turned to look back at the mother bear. The flames were still raging behind them, but she knew they had done it. The bear's eyes, once filled with panic and desperation, now held a deep sense of relief. The mother bear looked at Sarah one last time, and in that moment, they shared an understanding. No words were needed. As the mother bear finally took her place beside her cubs, she let out a low, rumbling growl, not in anger, but in a sound that almost seemed like a thank you. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She had just witnessed something extraordinary. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a connection between humans and nature, a moment of shared survival. As Sarah and her team watched the mother bear and her cubs recover, the wildfires continued to rage in the distance. The bears were safe now, and so was the team. Sarah looked around at her exhausted team, their faces covered in soot, but their spirits lifted by the rescue. It had been a hard battle, but they had won. "We did it," Sarah said softly, her voice barely audible over the crackling flames in the distance. "We saved them." And as the mother bear looked back one last time before leaving, Sarah couldn't help but feel that this experience would stay with her forever. It wasn't just about saving a bear. It was about the fragility of life, the importance of trust, and the bond that humans could share with the wild. And maybe, just maybe, it was a reminder that in the end, kindness can save us all. As Sarah watched the mother bear and her cubs disappear into the safety of the wilderness, She couldn't help but think about the countless other animals still out there, trapped, injured, or displaced by wildfires, deforestation, and climate change. Every year, over 1.25 billion animals lose their lives to wildfires alone. But together, we can make a difference. This isn't just a story about saving bears. It's a reminder that every life matters. Let's work together to protect the wild places and creatures that make our world so extraordinary. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of courage, compassion, and the incredible bond between humans and nature. And don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss an update. Together, we can be the change.